Hey guys, Jay here. Welcome to Eons of Battle. Games Workshop makes a lot of miniatures, and sometimes that works out really well, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I think rule of cool wins out over models making any sense on the tabletop. And so I want to talk about 5 instances of pretty much brand new miniatures that I think Games Workshop missed the mark on. And this isn't just gonna be me talking about models that I think don't look good. I'm talking about things that don't really work inside of the game of Warhammer 40,000. Starting off with number 1, the Necron Canoptech Doomstalker. This model looks phenomenal. It's very much War of the Worlds, tripod. It looks so cool with your sea of Necron warriors and one of these things towering above it. The problems come from it's a medium-sized vehicle with a really big gun, and that means it's kind of stepping on the toes of the Triarch Stalker and the Annihilation Barge. And it's a little bit of, but that's almost fine because technically its guns are different and it's sort of a different type of unit than those. And so, so you can still go with Annihilation Barge, or you can still go with the Triarch Stalkers. The Triarch Stalkers are so cool, and you have so many different weapon options to fulfill different roles in game. And this model has one gun, and what's really weird is it's the exact same gun as the Doomsday Arc. Like, the exact same gun, same stats. So literally, this is the same unit as the Annihilation Barge, which is really weird. Like, if you look at this model stats next to the Annihilation Barge, they're both like toughness 6. I think this one has 12 wounds, and then the Annihilation Barge has, or the Doomsday Arc has 14. Like, they're incredibly close in terms of points, in terms of damage output. They both have flare type weapons as their secondary weapon. The Annihilation Barge Doomsday Arc has Gauss Flyer arrays, whereas this has a pair of gas flyers. It's the same exact thing. They should be different. Like, obviously, it shouldn't be, when you're looking through the codex, those two heavy support options that are a similar amount of points and have the exact same gun, are they the same exact unit? It's just weird. Why not make it a different gun that fulfills a different role in the army, as opposed to it literally being the exact same thing? I think the model is perfect. I love the miniature. I think it just needs a rules tweak to make it its own thing. Maybe have this being more of like a buffing platform, or maybe okay, so the gun isn't identical. It's identical stats, but the Doomsday Arc has a slightly longer range, which doesn't really matter because in 40k 9th edition, everybody's playing on smaller boards. So it doesn't really matter if one has a 48-inch range and the other one has a 36-inch range. It's the same exact thing. Maybe have the Doomstalker. See, the tricky thing comes though is if you give it like a flamer weapon or a las cannon type weapon, then it's the Triarch Stalker. And if you give it a Tesla style weapon, then it's the Annihilation Barge. So there's a niche. I'm sure that there's a niche that this could fulfill, but it's not right now. It's just a newer, cooler Annihilation Barge. And I see online all the time people being like Annihilation Barge versus the Canoptech Doomstalker. Everybody is gonna go for the Doomstalker because it's new and really, really cool. But the Doomsday Arc is really cool too, and it's been around since like 2011. And so I want people to love that model and for that model to have its own unique place as your long range, just cannon type weapon. And this is also your long range cannon type weapon. It's very confusing. Games Workshop, fix it. Please fix it. Next up, we have the Tyranid's Parasite of Mortrex. I was super shocked when the Parasite of Mortrex got released. It's a beautiful miniature with a really, really cool bit of lore behind it. I think the last time rules for the Parasite of Mortrex that were published was in like the Tyranid 5th edition codex. It's super, super cool. And then they made it a fast attack choice. It's a small model on a 40mm base. It's a fast attack choice with a sort of, orc knobby type stat line and the ability to implant a parasite. I really like its rules, but I feel like they didn't push it far enough. I also feel like this model would fit much better in the elite or HQ choice. Tyranids already have a phenomenal flying HQ choice in the Winged Hive Tyrant, lovingly referred to as a Flyrant. But I feel like this guy could sort of work in there too. And if not an HQ, then maybe as an elite choice, similar to the Gene Stealer cult. They have tons and tons of elite choices that are single guys that sort of blur the line between HQ and elite. And they do a really good job of either buffing your army a lot or kind of applying nerfs to your opponent's army. Where the Parasite of Mortrex is one small, fairly fragile unit that takes up a fast attack slot. And I don't know, it's kind of weird. I feel like it doesn't fit into that role very well. Usually fast attack choices are either flyers or they're some sort of cavalry unit, not just one kind of average dude. And the rules are super gimmicky, and I like gimmicky rules, but I think Games Workshop was maybe a little bit too cautious in being gimmickly. So they have the ability to spawn in Ripper Swarms, which is phenomenal, but it takes a lot of dice to get to that free Ripper Swarm, because you do your normal claw attacks, and then you add one extra attack for the ovipositor. And then if that attack lands, so if you don't roll a 1, that hit goes on to your opponent, and then your opponent, if they fail their saves and they take the wounds, they now are infected with the parasite. And then in their turn, they roll a d6, and on a 1, 2, or 3, they remain infected, and on a 4, 5, and 6, they're no longer infected, and they also take d3 mortal wounds, and on that d3 mortal wound roll, if you roll a 2 or a 3, then a Ripper Swarm is placed, I think 6 inches away from that unit, not within engagement range. And that's a lot of steps to get the Ripper Swarm base. Really, these rules are, the main course is the 3 mortal wounds, which is cool. But then the cherry on top is the free Ripper Swarm. But I want the free Ripper Swarm to be the main course. The rules as written are probably very, very fair. But what I want is more Ripper Swarms to just spawn into existence. The problem is Ripper Swarms are actually kind of good. And so maybe they need to make a new Ripper Swarm that's called like Fresh Ripper Swarm or Baby Ripper Swarms that have more of like an Orc Grot type stat line. Because number one, also that's a ton of rules to deal with for this one effect to go off. And you're maybe gonna sting 2 things a game, and then one of them is probably gonna recover pretty early on that 50-50 roll. So you're probably gonna get like 3 Ripper Swarms. If this thing is really bouncing every turn, stabbing something that is weak enough that it's not gonna die from charging, and it's gonna use positioning perfectly to not get shot off the board immediately because it's not that exceptional in terms of stat lines. There's amazing cases where you might end up with like 5 or 6 Ripper Swarms, but more likely it's gonna be 1 or 2. I think it'd be much more interesting if stab D3 baby Ripper Swarms. D3 baby Ripper Swarms. Also, maybe move it into, the elite slots are usually really jam-packed with units because the elite slot is for everything that doesn't make any sense, which is most units in Warhammer 40,000. So maybe you make it a baby HQ choice. You've got your Flyrant and then you got your Parasite of Mortrex. And that also gives it a lot of benefits of the HQ rules not being able to be targeted under certain conditions. And I love the idea of being able to tailor your army into gimmicks. And I think it'd be really cool to have this as a way to have just an all-flying Tyranid army. So you've got lots and lots of Shrikes, Flying Hive Tyrant, the Parasite of Mortrex, maybe those Mycetic Spores to drop in more Gaunts and Termagants. I think there's totally something to the Parasite of Mortrex, but I think it's kind of languishing as a gimmicky fast attack choice rather than maybe an elite choice or an HQ choice that it should be. And I like its rules, and I love that Games Workshop tried, but I would like to see them try again. And moving right along to the Space Marine Storm Speeder. Now, let me get this out of the way first. I don't like this model at all. It looks like a shoe. But number two, it's stepping all over the toes of all of the current flyers that exist for 40K. Technically, it's not a flyer, it's a scammer. And it's, this model is in a weird space where, what about the Storm Talon gunship? What about the normal land speeders? It's covered in guns, but it's not that tough. It looks like a shoe. It's a weird model. A lot of the Primaris models suffer from having way too many normal guns, as opposed to maybe just speccing into one really good purpose-made gun, and then maybe with like one anti-infantry gun tacked onto the side. Whereas this, you've got missiles, you've got like Gatling guns, you've got the Primaris autocannon, you've got a lot of things to roll for to do a moderate amount of damage to troops, which Space Marines have no problems dealing with in general. And you can put on more missile launchers and then the Sky Spear missile launchers on the top rack that do a lot of damage to vehicles. It's also humongous, which is weird. It's sort of bigger than the Storm Talon gunship, which is already a model you don't see a lot of in game. Flyers are weird in general, and I think that this model kind of suffers from Primaris they have a medium vehicle in the Redemptor Dreadnought, so they need a medium flyery type thing. You see a lot of models similar to this, like Imperial Guard have Sentinels, the Eldar have the Vipers, where it's like a weapons platform that has the ability to move quickly so that you can reposition and get around, shoot around terrain and stuff. Whereas this is just a bus full of guns. And it just doesn't fit. It doesn't feel right. I don't know why you would take this over a Redemptor Dreadnought or the Primaris version of the Predator tank. And it's the same size as those models. It's just floating higher up in the air. It's kind of a bizarre model. Games Workshop isn't gonna change it or refresh it or make it look like something that makes a little bit more sense. In fact, they came out with the Primaris ATV and they also came out with the Servo Strike turret, which both kind of fulfill the role of a more mobile weapon system. Obviously not the turret because it's stationary, but maybe you take all three of those units and you build it into one model that is just a really good gun platform that can have the ability to move around, as opposed to a bus full of guns to hand out a ton of dice. It's kind of bizarre. I don't quite get it. And it has three different options of how to build it, which kind of means you can build it any which way, which I feel like kind of makes it more bland and makes it step on the toes harder of other vehicles that do very similar thing, like Storm Speeders with the missile pods, or the Space Marine assault bikes, the Space Marine bikes that have the multi-melta on them. I don't know, it's just kind of weird. I don't get it, I don't like it, and I don't think it looks that good. It looks just like the normal Primaris rectangular vehicles, except it's floating higher. Next up, we have the Adeptus Mechanicus Sidonian Dragoons. I actually purchased these when Games Workshop dropped Adeptus, or not Codex Adeptus Mechanicus, Codex Skitarii. Adeptus Mechanicus didn't come out until a few months later because they decided to bring out a new faction as two separate factions and then shove them together. Thanks Games Workshop for that. But the Sidonian Dragoons have always been in a little bit of a weird spot. The model is gorgeous. I absolutely love this model. I purchased two of them for my burgeoning Skitarii army before they turned it into Adeptus Mechanicus. And I ended up selling them because they were horribly expensive and I didn't feel like I wanted to continue that army. But these have always been in a weird space, rules-wise, because these are your cavalry. These are your guys with swords who charge into combat, and they cost $60 a piece and tower over dreadnoughts. Like they are like Wraith, not Wraith Knights, Wraith Lord-sized models. They're so big in-game, and they're $60 a piece, and they can be taken in squads of 6. So no, nobody's gonna do that. They're cool, and I really like them, and I would love to see squads of 3, 4, 5 all over Adeptus Mechanicus boards charging into stuff and dealing damage with their huge taser goads. But at $60 a pop for a really large model, it just doesn't really fulfill that role. These guys, they've played around with the points to try to like turn them into something that they are, as opposed to what they should have been. When they dropped in 7th edition, they were 45 points each. So less, they cost more dollars than they came with points in game. And then in 8th edition, they were 68 points. And in 9th edition, they're 70 points. So they've risen sort of dramatically in price. They're still pretty cheap in game. And they're meant to just be dudes on horses, which is great. I love that. But when you make a model that's enormous and charge an enormous price for it, it's just not gonna be able to fulfill that role for most people's armies. Either what you do with it, it comes with a couple of gun options that aren't very good, or really the thing you do is you take the taser goad. But I could see this being turned into something a little bit more like an Imperial Guard Sentinel or a Eldar Viper, and have it be a mobile weapons platform, because at $60 for one, people are only gonna buy one, maybe two of these things. They're not gonna outfit an entire squad. And so if this is just something that kind of runs around and finds firing arcs or buffing arcs for other units, I could see that as being something worthwhile. But the other option I would say is maybe put 2 of these in a box and sell them for $60, because they're guys on horsebacks. They're normal cavalry. They just ended up making such a cool ass model that it's hard to have it fulfill its role in game, because, you know, you're buying a squad, you know, you can buy a Sentinel for $30, or you can buy the Sidonian Dragoon, which is worse than a Sentinel for, it's not that big. It's more like this big. A Sidonian Dragoon for, you know, double the price, and it's not as good in game. It's kind of bizarre. I don't understand the Sidonian Dragoons, but I love them and I want them to be good. So yeah, either sell them 2 to a box or turn them into not dudes on horsebacks in terms of their rules. And next up, we have the flagellants for the Sisters of Battle. And these are a really weird thing to me, because they're weird in the Sisters of Battle army, because they are exactly the same thing as the Sisters Repentiant. Okay, so you've got a Sisters of Battle army. You've got a whole bunch of battle sisters, some tanks, some of the really cool Sisters of Battle mechs, and you've got some interesting vehicles. And then you have a squad of Sisters Repentia, who are naked folks being punished for crimes, suicide charging into close combat with massively silly hand weapons with no ranged weapons at all. And then you've got the flagellants, which are naked folks being punished for crimes, suicide charging themselves into close combat with massive silly hand weapons and no ranged weapons to speak of. How are these 2 separate units for the same faction? They've both always existed for the Sisters of Battle army, but it's just weird to have 2 almost the same things in the exact same army. Yes, they do a very slightly different thing. The Sisters Repentia are better at punching tougher things, and the flagellants are better at punching squishy things. But they're both naked dudes. Imagine you're a Sisters of Battle player and you decide to take both of these units. So you paint up 20 Sisters Repentia, and you're like, holy cow, that was a challenge, lots of bear skin. Okay, now it's time to paint up my 20 flagellants, which are the same models almost. It's wild that both of these things exist for the same army. Really, the flagellants, I feel like, would be perfect if they ever do a Inquisition army, because the Inquisition would, you know, they would requisition flagellants and they would look great. You've got your Tempestus Scions, maybe some Guard conscripts, your big blob of cool Inquisition models, and then you've got a couple of flagellant screening units. Beautiful, love it. How come in the Sisters of Battle, there's 2 different squads of naked folks? It's just weird, and they're painted exactly the same on the Games Workshop web store. The only difference is one of them have big, huge whips, and the other one have big, huge chainswords. Literally, they both also have like facial coverings and like sportswear, like, you know, just underclothes. It's ridiculous. They're so similar. There's almost no point. Like, I can't really imagine people buying both units. I feel like you'd either go with the Sisters Serpentia, which are way cooler lore-wise and are actually Sisters of Battle to go in your Sisters of Battle army, as opposed to going with the flagellants, which are just lobotomized dudes and dudettes who are hopped up on drugs and told to go wreak havoc. Super weird. I don't know how you fix them for the Sisters of Battle either, because they look the same. That's another big problem, is that they're so similar looking that it's not going to be self-evident for your opponent what's going on. It's like, okay, so those guys have chainswords, and are those the same guys with whips? And then you just kind of have to go with, yeah, they're the same guys, just with 2 different weapon options. So I think either one day you let them maybe be taken in Imperial Guard, or you let them be taken in some sort of a Inquisition force, and, you know, leave them for people to not take in a Sisters of Battle army, but just add them to those other forces. I don't know, or maybe you change their rules to, I mean, they're dudes with whips. It's not like you can give them guns. They're not going to put extra sprues in the box to make them into like servitors. But yeah, the Argo flagellants are bizarre to me. Games Workshop, if you're listening, these are the 5 units that you have made that are cool, but they don't make any sense, and I don't get them. I don't actually see these units a lot. I don't actually see these models a lot, like on Instagram or on YouTube or Facebook. And I can't imagine that's because people don't like them. I think it's just because they're in a really awkward place where people might not want to buy them because they already have units that are basically the same, or they're just not that usable in game, or they don't fulfill a unique enough role for people to want to pull the trigger and add them to their armies. So Games Workshop, if you're looking for something to do, if you've got a slow week and you're like, all right, what do we got? All right, boys, what do we got? What do we got on the books today? Maybe take another look at these 5 units, because I think all of these could be amazing with some pretty massive tweaks. I think that they really missed the mark. And if your name is Mark, you might be a perfect candidate for our Patreon. Over there, we have a new miniature, a bound demon, complete with ball gag. We also have a new terrain pack, some really cool trenches that you can use to crisscross your battlefields, and tons of other STL terrain files. We also have one extra episode of Eon's Battle a week on the Patreon, where we critique your miniatures, and we also, on Fridays, we all hop into a Discord server and we chit-chat the night away. We also have merch, link in the description. Games Workshop, I know you're listening. Make the Sidonian Dragoons good, please. If the Sidonian Dragoons go 2 to a box, I might reconsider that Adeptus Mechanicus army. But until then, bye-bye.